Hey, Alex here from Black Sheep IT Consulting. So we are looking at Siebel here. Yes, believe me, that Siebel, it's just a style sheet that I'm goofing around with. So don't worry about the styling too much in this demo. The demo first, and then we take a look at how it's implemented. So I got a new toolbar button here, Black Sheep Data Import. When I click that button, I get a dialog and I can choose a file. And here's the file I prepared. So we're going to look at it in a moment. So it's a CSV file, as you can see, for contacts. And I click import and I get a nice progress bar. And then I get a feedback, import completed successfully. That's the file name, that's the byte size, and that's the record count. Let's click OK. And I also get operations, the status object basically. So everything has been inserted except one record. There was something already exists in the database. Yeah, okay, so that's interesting. So I get feedback what happened. All right, so let's take a look at the CSV file first. So these were the 36 records which I inserted. You will note that on the top of the file there are two lines, which we'll explain shortly, but line 3 and subsequent lines are the records, the record data to be imported. So all these contacts should have a last name with A, B, C, D. So let's see if that really worked. Let me just run a query. ABC should do the trick. And yes, looks like they all have been imported nicely, except that one record which was, well, reported as not imported. Okay, so we have seen the demo, and now, of course, we explain what is going on here, what is the purpose of all this. So let's wind back in history a little bit. And winding back we do, this is the Siebel Hub blog, and if you search for CSV data import, there are 3 blog articles which yours truly wrote in 2017, so that's like, yeah, 6 years ago. And recently I had a conversation with a Siebel Hub reader on these particular articles, and they wanted to understand how to implement this. So the links to the articles you will find in the description of this video. The summary is that part 1 is helping you understand the steps to define your own toolbar item that pops up a import dialog. And I didn't mention that, but of course it works from anywhere in Siebel. You don't have to be on, let's say, the contact screen to import contacts. So the import is driven by 2 business services mainly. That is read CSV file and EAI Siebel adapter. So as a Siebel Hub regular, you might have heard about both of them already, and you might have been using them in your real life. And if you've never heard about either of them, check out the Siebel Hub Business Service Library, which is a great page, which lists, yeah, since almost 10 years or so, we started listing important business services for, well, Siebel developers, most of which are documented very well in Bookshelf, including the read CSV file. A read CSV file is special, however, and there's an article about it. If you're trying to use the read CSV file business service, you have to understand it comes from the Siebel marketing application. And you should really check with Oracle, your sales representatives, that you have a license to use this business service. So if you don't have a license, don't use it, right? Needless to say, all code, etc., implementations that I show in these videos, in any of my videos, is purely educational. So you shouldn't use any of this in your real life production environment. You must find your own way, but of course you can get some inspiration there. So that read CSV file business service expects a CSV file, of course, but the first and second row must denominate the name of an integration object, an internal integration object, and the second row must have the, well, integration object dot notation specific column list. So in this case, for example, it's account data that is described here. So the first row is the name of an internal integration object, and the second row is using dot notation to identify, well, let's say the fields in the respective business component. So it's fairly easy to use, and with the description you should get at least somewhere to be successful in reading a CSV file, importing it. And so we want to take this to the next level here. So imagine you have the requirement of an arbitrary file, of course following a specific format, and that is a CSV file, and users should be able to just, well, literally upload it in Siebel, and it will be processed and feedback will be given. So the first part of the article series and this first video of 3 is how do you create that custom pop-up applet and then use a workflow process to process the file. So we start here following the article. You can follow along yourself. So first of all, I found an applet which does what I want. It's a standard applet. Let me show you how I found this applet. So one piece of functionality in Siebel where files are imported is actually iHelp. So if I go to administration, iHelp inside map, and let's say all iHelp items, there will be in the menu an import option, import iHelp item definition. Now that's very common in Siebel that you have export and import XML files probably. And well, that import dialog is sure what I want. Let's say it has a file browser, it has an import and a cancel button. I notice that import is active while there is no file chosen, so that might not be ideal. But this is something, this is a good starting point as any. So let's identify that applet. So one little trick to identify pop-up applets, by the way, is because they're not identifiable in the view itself or with about view, you can open the JavaScript console of your browser and run a command or one line of JavaScript, Siebel app.s_app, get active view, get applet map, the famous applet map of a view. And this is a dynamic map, by the way. So every applet that's currently available in the view is listed here, including the task definition import pop-up applet. So that's how we can grab the name. Okay, copy that. And then go to Web Tools or Siebel Tools and, well, locate the applet. And of course, you would need a workspace to do that. I've already done it. So you copy that standard applet and create a custom copy. So here's the standard applet. And here is the copy I created. So I did a few changes. Well, not too many actually. I just used string override to change the applet title, obviously. And if you go down here, the control list, it's a very tiny applet, doesn't have too many controls. So I changed the caption of the applet title here as well. Notice that's twice the same string. It will appear twice. You can change that, of course, later. And there's the buttons actually. There are here the browse, the file browser button, the cancel import button. So very cool, of course, in Siebel, as always, you copy a standard applet and you have all the functionality without having to reinvent the wheel. It's interesting to look at the applet user props because those user properties are something you need to change as well. There's an import business service, and the value, you can see I already changed the value here to the name of the business service we have to create. And the import method gives away the business service as being a copy of another standard object that is the workflow process manager. So I want to run a specific workflow, and the problem is I could run the workflow process manager here with the run process method, but obviously there's no argument that I can pass. So that argument I pass as part of the custom business service, a wrapper for the workflow process manager, and we'll check it out in a second. It's also worthwhile to explore the world of import pop-up applets, if you will, because the browse control, it's actually a file control, HTML type file. And in this version of Siebel, modern Siebel Open UI, Oracle used a client PM user prop. So there's, of course, a standard PM that picks up this user property upload trigger control. You don't need to change that. Just understand that something goes on in the browser, and that's driven by JavaScript. And Oracle has been using the client PM user properties here. So the cancel button is normal. The import button is also using client PM user properties. So it's just an interesting side note. If you copy the standard applet, you get all this stuff, and you have a working pop-up applet. So again, let's go back to what does the import button trigger apart from uploading the file. You also have a business service that then you can invoke a method of. So let's find that business service here. So let's query that. And I have created this business service. So you would have to do something similar. You can, of course, use the business service and eScript to process the data. So it can be anything. Because that business service, the method you invoke will get an input property set with all the necessary information about the file uploaded to the Siebel server. So you can open it and inspect it, or just forward everything to, let's say, a workflow like we do here. So this is essentially a copy of the workflow process manager business service. It gives away, the class gives it away as that. And if you know about the business or the workflow process manager business service, you can add a user property called process name. So here's the name of the workflow process that I couldn't pass as part of the applet. So now I, of course, need to create the business workflow process as well, and we'll check that out in a moment. But before we check out the workflow process, I would like to show you some code I wrote in that business service. So you don't need to write any code, but as you go along, you want to, well, be clever. You want to learn about the input property set that is passed in from that pop-up applet. So I wrote a quick trap here with a variable capturing the input property set. So I should be able to run this in the debugger and stop here and see what the applet passes in. So let's try this. So you might wonder about those buttons I'm using. This is the DevPops utility collection I'm using. You can, of course, load the script debugger in the normal way. So that's the script debugger web tools, and I just put a breakpoint in here and start my application. Nice use case for the web tools script debugger, of course. Okay, so let's try and trigger the business service. So We will have to discuss how to get the toolbar item. But now I'm going to choose File and click Import. And now it stops at the code. So the business service definitely has been invoked. Now let's pop this up a little bit. And let's see that the input property set is not empty. It has indeed a file name. So that file name is, as you notice, a temporary file on the Siebel server. And the file type CSV. So we have a path to the file. And that is the important part. So that, of course, the input property set is passed to the workflow process. So all you need is to set up a exactly named workflow process property called file name. And the workflow will be able to, well, pick up the file from the Siebel server temp directory. That's the Siebel server where your object manager is running, by the way, if you're worried about having too many Siebel servers. Okay, so let's just continue the code, and that will, of course, continue to run, which is just fine. Yeah, it completed with updates. These times it inserted record number 6, which is a bit weird because it couldn't at the first time. But anyway, it reported that fine. Okay, so, but let's go in the sequence that we have. So let's go back to Web Tools. What do we have? We have the business service that wraps the workflow process manager. We understand that the pop-up applet passes an input property set, which we can pass on to the workflow. To invoke the applet, we need, of course, a toolbar item. Now, toolbar items are twofold. You need a command object. So, next thing you create after the applet and maybe the business service is to create a command object. Let me show you the one I created. So here it is, a simple command object if there is any. So you need a name for it. You need a display name, which you string override, a pop-up dimension, a method, which is go to applet, and the argument must be a valid pop-up applet. So make sure you have a copy of an existing pop-up applet like we have discussed. Okay, and that's it. So if you want accelerators, you can add them, but we don't use them here. And then you go to a toolbar. I extended a standard toolbar, the HI main, a famous toolbar, which is already included in most applications. So I added a toolbar item. And you can see that toolbar item down here. Its name is data import, and of course you refer to the command that you created in the first place with a display name, black sheep data import. Type link so you can copy an existing item, make sure it has a unique position. Okay, so that gives you a toolbar button that you can click and it will pop up the applet. So here it is. You will notice that, of course, I've done a little bit of CSS manipulation here. So that's not a standard Siebel style sheet, but that's the toolbar, all right. You notice I have a custom icon next to the text. So little sidestep, how do you format your toolbars? So what I've done here is I removed some entries from the style sheet. So you will see a toolbar, custom toolbar popping up like this. It's not very beautiful. It actually uses an image where you have no resource for. So it's a broken image. It still works, so it's still operational, mind you. But the image, of course, you want a custom icon, etc. So I'll quickly show you how to get there, because it's the icing on the cake, really, for making your toolbar stand out. So you can do, of course, an inspect in your browser. And let's check it out. So yeah, that's an undefined image if there is any. There's a span, which is the thing inside the list item. So that list item is generated automatically, of course. And notice the span has a custom class, a Siebel UI icon, toolbar, data import. So it uses the information from the command to create a unique enough class name for that span. So this is where you can get started in your style sheet. So let's check out an example style sheet that you could use. So what I've done here is first I made sure that the image is not displayed. I don't want it to see it. I want a nice icon, so I don't need that font family actually. I used, an emoji, literally, to use as an icon. You can, of course, use a glyph in a font, an icon font. Notice that you have to use the before pseudo class on that span. That will add the content. In my case, it's a character that looks like a flash. And then I added some modifications to the container of the toolbar and the view bar to make it look, well, as you have seen before. So this is the complete. So these two actually take care of the toolbar item. The other two take care of the toolbar formatting in the client. So let's just reload this. And let's see that now the toolbar appears in a much nicer way, which it does. Okay, so that's the story of the toolbar item. Again, let's click it and it should pop up the applet. But you notice something on this version of the applet that it, for example, does not allow to click import unless you have chosen a file to import. So let's check, choose a file. Now the import button becomes active and I can, of course, import again, which I will not do right now. So there is some manipulation going on that applet, which we will discuss in the second part of this video series. So the first part really deals with getting the import to work, and the second part is about fleshing out the dialog, and the third part is about getting feedback from the import. So let's get back to our list of things we have to do. So we have a check on creating the applet, creating the command, creating the toolbar item, even with some formatting here for OpenUI. So now we need the workflow and the business service. So this is just the other way around, workflow first, then the business service. So let's check out the workflow. So again, as a word of caution, you will see a workflow now. It works for me. It might not work for you. So here's the workflow I created. And as you can see, it has a few more steps than you would expect. So your first version might just have 2 steps. First, read CSV. So that is, of course, using the read CSV file, CSV to prop set method. And you need input to read CSV. So you need a file name. And notice the workflow process property called file name. So let's check out the process props. So you have to create this process property exactly as written, file name. Remember, it's passed in from the applet to the business service, which passes it on to the workflow. File type you can use as well. It's input given from the applet. So that file name, of course, is picked up by the read CSV here. And delete file, there's another process property where you can drive delete the temporary file Remember, that's the file already on the server, already uploaded, to delete it or not after reading it. So if it contains, for example, personally identifiable data for contacts, you might want to make sure that the file is deleted after processing. The output of read CSV is a Siebel message. So you take the Siebel message, you pass it on to a hierarchical process property. You also have a nice feature here. You have another Siebel message, which is called Siebel message error, which is basically the bad records. So you can use that for anything useful. And you also get the number of records processed, and I put that into a records from CSV process property. The second step that you need is upsert. That is, of course, EI, Siebel adapter upsert. So you pass in that Siebel message into the Siebel message input argument. We also can pass in record level transactions, true or false. I have set it to true by default. What does this mean for EI Siebel adapter? It will process each record individually as a transaction, so committing after each record. The reason I'm doing this is I get feedback for each record, what went okay or what went wrong. Because I also have declared that I want a status object. So status object is a parameter for EI Siebel adapter, and you can set it to true to return a status object, which you have to define as a status key in the integration object. So there's an integration object involved, we have to check it out. And yeah, the output, in case you request a status object, the Siebel message of the EI Siebel adapter's upsert method will be that status object as a Siebel message. So these two steps are really what you need. You see that I added 3 more steps to set profile attributes. Actually 3 times save information as the workflow processes, and so I can pick up that information as profile attributes from the browser. But that we will really need only in the 3rd part of this video series. So you might start your workflow process just with a simple 2-step process these 2 business services. Now let's talk about that integration object. So you have seen that in my import file, the first line is sample contact SIA, which is the name of an integration object, which actually in modern Siebel is inactive. You can use any other integration object that you prefer. Must not necessarily be contact related, can be anything, as long as it's active and of course operational. So let's try and find this here. So here the sample contact SIA, I made sure it's active. So it's inactive probably in your database too. So I activated it, and let's check it out real quick. It's tiny compared to other integration objects. That's why I use it for demonstration. And I only care about the contact data. I could insert contacts with business addresses and so forth. And let's check out the keys for contacts. So you see that there is a status key. And for the status object to work, you must add a status key or must make sure it exists. And the status key, in our case, uses the first name, last name, and the system operation field. So that is passed back by the EI Siebel adapter should you request the status object. Okay, let's jump back to our article where you have the description of the 2 business services you really need. Again, if you use read CSV file, word of warning here, make sure you have a license for it. If you don't have a license for it, you must implement your own CSV reader or whatever. But it shouldn't be really too complicated. So that wrapper business service we've already seen. remember that you must reference that business service in the pop-up applet, as we have already checked. And you need a test file. You can start with those 3 lines you can copy from the article, which is the same file that I used, and then you go and test. Yeah, well, let's test that again. So just to prove the point, I will just modify the input data by replacing ABCD with XYZ. So to prove a point, we are going to use the home page, which is not the contact screen. We can still open the pop-up, of course. We can choose the file. And we can click import. And that, of course, comes back after a while with a success message and the operation. So I see updates here because I ran it already with that XYZ. But you get the operation, of course, as insert or update. So again, this is a special feature. In this first part of the exercise or the video series, we have just created the necessary repository objects. So let's go through it real quick. We copied a standard import pop-up applet to have a custom one. We created a command and toolbar item to be able to pop it up. We have a workflow process with read CSV file and EI Siebel adapter, which processes the incoming data. And we needed a wrapper business service, a copy of workflow process manager with the process name, user property pointing to the workflow. And then we pointed the pop-up applets user properties to the run process method of our custom business service, and we are able to import any file that has a matching integration object and integration component fields as read CSV file expected successfully. So I hope you enjoyed this part. In the second part, we will deal in a little bit more detail with the dialog itself. So can we show a progress bar? Can we deactivate buttons? Can we remove, relabel the cancel button, and so forth? So that's going to be the second part of the video series. Check out the links in the description. And in the third part, we will show a status object information as already demonstrated. So stay tuned for information how to accomplish this. So thanks much for watching. See you in the next part. Take care. Bye bye.